All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is August monthly member gathering. And for those of you who haven't joined us before, welcome, and we are glad to see you here. For those that have come, you might know the drill. We love to start things off by introducing ourselves in the chat. So if you want to tell us who you are, if you're with a farm or an organization, what part of the country you're from is always really fun to see where folks are gathering and calling in from. Um, and for this particular monthly member gathering, I'd love to know if you are a board member. We put out kind of a special call to have board members join us. So please feel free to throw those in the chat. Like every monthly member gathering that Care Farming Network hosts, we're going to have a real brief slide presentation here just to ground us in some ideas and thoughts around effective board governance. So we'll start out by looking at these slides. Hopefully that will spur some ideas, comments, questions from y'all. We're then going to be joined by Woody, who's the executive director at Red Wiggler Community Farm, who has many years of experience working with boards. And then since it's a monthly member gathering, this is a time for you all to connect and share ideas and ask questions of others, and also to share kind of what works for your organization. So we just open that up, and that's the majority of the rest of our meeting. So to kick things off, I will start with introducing myself, and I'm Kate Mudge with Care Farming Network. I work on outreach and communications and host these monthly member gatherings. So again, thank you for joining us. We're going to be recording this session today. And for everybody that registers, we also send the slide presentation as well as some resources that are shared. So don't worry about trying to collect any notes because you'll get a follow-up email with links to many of the tools and resources that we're sharing here. So, and again, for anybody that's joining, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat there. So I'm going to kick us off and just kind of, again, ground us. And like when we talk about board governance, what does that mean? Nonprofits have these sometimes crazy groups called board of directors, and they're responsible for lots of things. And this first slide just kind of gives us an outline of, regardless of the size of organization that you are, boards are there to do a number of things. They're ensuring that everything is on the up and up, that there's healthy governance, that there's leadership. One of the most important things is that there's financial stability for an organization. Board members serve as ambassadors, and of course, they provide support and supervision to an executive director. I think it's also important to note that there's different types of boards, and here's kind of two examples of a governing board and a working board. So a governing board, what they're doing is kind of minimal day-to-day involvement. And you'll have kind of this high level of decision making with lots of advisory roles, providing that guidance and advice. Whereas a working board, you often see working boards at organizations that might be more in their startup phase, where you have board members that are really doing hands-on involvement, lots of day-to-day operations, pretty direct management, really active volunteers, really active participation. Sometimes the working board, there's no staff with an organization. So the working board is literally there to provide all of that day-to-day operational and support to just keeping a organization going. So what do we mean by each of the things that we talked about in terms of the roles and responsibilities and like why we have boards? There's this strategic leadership, communication and goals, figuring out how to get there. Oftentimes there's a strategic plan in place. If there isn't a strategic plan, we'll talk about creating one. And also having some good board meetings that are really getting to the meat of what it is that needs to be discussed. These are some principles and advice I'm going to be sharing from Propel Nonprofits that is specifically talking about how a board can be the most effective in this leadership. So again, kind of cutting through a lot of the fluff and getting right to the meat in a meeting, for instance, to make things operate more efficiently and to really anticipate and navigate change. Really important role for boards to take. Financial stability. Board members need to understand business models. They have to understand the finances, and they have to make sure that their organization that they serve as a board member on really has that infrastructure to create good pictures and snapshots of the financial health. So making sure that your board can read the reports if you're an executive director or if you're the treasurer of a board, really like kind of distilling those numbers down so that they tell a story. Specifically around the health of an organization. Then you're also working to develop those strategies, fundraisers or events, just to make sure that your mission is realistic, that you can fund your mission and that it's realistic. And again, ensuring your financial reporting requirements are compliant. Every state has different rules and regulations, but when you have a board of directors, you are following both articles of incorporation as well as your bylaws and many state regulations that are saying there's certain reports and numbers and accounting principles and practices that an organization must follow for transparency and health. Board members are ambassadors. They are out there connecting with people, creating relationships that are really helpful to the strategic mission of an organization. They are participating in the fund development. Many boards are required, or it's recommended that board members actually be financial stewards and donors. They're out there listening to community members' needs, and that they're sharing the impact that the nonprofit that they sit on, what impact they make, as well as they talk about why they are involved. I know I sit on a board here, I'm in Minnesota, and I sit on the board of an organization. It's headquartered about 3 hours away from me, but you can bet I'm like often in circles where I am advocating for the work of this organization that I'm on the board for. And even it's a volunteer role, I feel like ambassadorship is one of the most important things that I can do as a board member to help the viability and reputation and the work of the board that I'm on. If there is staff at a farm, at an organization, it's the board that's usually doing the recruitment and hiring of an executive director and supervising their performance, having some strategies around what happens if that executive director leaves, either in an emergency situation or a transition. And also making sure that they're checking in with the ED about how they want to be supported and what they need from the board. And ensuring healthy governance. Boards are there to be transparent. Again, I mentioned the bylaws, maintaining compliance. Oftentimes you're going to have to be recruiting new board members when terms are up. And just taking that responsibility for the board business. One of the best practices is regularly conducting a board self-evaluation, kind of allows those board members to look at how they board or how they govern both on an individual basis and as a collective group. So the next couple of slides are sort of the things that any board member should regularly be doing, or I should say any board. So financial info in your board. Yeah, there's going to be income statements and balance sheets and budgets. I know I work kind of in a financial sector, so I don't have any problem reading spreadsheets, but I can tell you, listening to other board members, sometimes you put a balance sheet or like a profit and loss in front of them and you get kind of like the starry look in their eyes. There are so many good resources available right now that help simplify the numbers game so that people understand what it is they're looking at. And I'm going to be sharing some of those resources after this meeting too, but ways of just simplifying, streamlining, but also providing enough context for board members to really understand how are things going financially, to recognize when there's red flags and to also kind of recognize where they can come in and support. Maybe that's hosting an additional fundraiser or understanding how the diverse forms of revenue are being collected. But the first kind of guidepost that any board member would use are looking at those financial statements, which should be reviewed regularly at every board meeting. Oftentimes there's audits and 990 forms, but these are just sort of the basics of what boards should do. Here's also, will be in the resources, just a nice template for board of directors meetings. All meetings need to be, or should be, best practice, have meeting minutes and agendas that are approved. And so if you are needing a really nice template to use for your board, this is a great example of a nice way to structure and capture the meeting notes. Board recruitment. Sometimes a term is 1 year, sometimes it's 3 years, but you're gonna always have to think about developing and evolving your board. So many nonprofits, when they first start out, have a really active working board. As they're evolving, they're bringing on new board members. Just a couple questions here before you start recruiting new board members, though, is do you really know what your strategic direction and priorities are? Because as those new folks come in, they're going to need to know where you are at as an organization. Are you prepared to invest the time to orient new members? Do you have a process, or are you kind of throwing somebody right into their first meeting without understanding the context of how that meeting might operate and what's being asked of people? Understanding what your expectations are for the board service and whether or not they're realistic. I don't know how many times I've been on a board and you hear that it's, a time commitment of 2 to 4 hours a month, and you realize quite quickly that it can be a lot more. So just being upfront with that commitment and expectation goes a long way. And then just looking at diversifying your board. Are your board members or your recruitments taking into account diverse perspectives and experiences? In terms of where to recruit new members, community engagement channels, lean on your existing board members. On the one board I mentioned that I'm on, if your term is up, one of the expectations is that you are going to help to actively recruit the next person coming in to take your place. Thinking about developing a pipeline to board service. Sometimes boards will have work groups where you're not a board member, but it's a way of stepping into a role so that when and if you are interested in becoming a board member, you're sort of prepared to do that. And then another question is just to ask, what kind of local institutional or virtual pathways make the most sense to connect with folks that might be interested and willing to serve on your board. Here again in Minnesota, we have Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, great platform to share board positions, but there's lots of other opportunities out there too, depending on your region. So this is also just another resource that will be shared when you're thinking about your board recruitment, kind of keeping track of what areas of expertise people are bringing, or also identifying the needs of the board members. So some boards like to have a legal representative, a lawyer, or somebody in the insurance sector, or somebody in marketing or HR, to have kind of a fully formed board where you've got representation and special skills. So this is a great resource to kind of do an internal audit, if you will, of your board members, to think about who you might add and who might be missing. So that was like the quickest 101 on board governance. But again, this is a monthly member gathering, and this is a chance for y'all to share. And I want to welcome Woody, as I mentioned before. He's the executive director and founder of Red Wiggler Community Farm. And he's going to talk just a little bit about his experience. I'm leaving and we'll cut and paste this into our chat, and then I will stop our screen share because some of the questions that I would like to propose just as kind of kickoff ideas for today is to ask Woody and all of you all what practices have worked really well for your organization and your board. Also, what challenges are you experiencing, either with a board, within your organization, or with your board experience? And this is a time for information gathering and sharing. So if you've had a really great success story to share, please do. Also, if you've got questions or a struggle, and you want feedback from others, please feel free to throw those in the chat. And after we hear from Woody, we'll open it up and have a broad conversation. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share. And welcome to you, Woody. Thanks for joining.
Hi,
I just
everybody.
proposed like 3 questions there. I'm going to let you
Yeah.
just kind of kick us off and maybe tell us a little bit about your background and step into whatever resonated there for you.
Sure. So Red Wiggler, I founded Red Wiggler, hard to believe, but 28 years ago. Our first board was essentially friends of mine, teachers who I had had in college who were sort of like mentors. And when you form a nonprofit, you don't really know where to start. So someone gave me some advice to just go with people I already know, and that they would trust me to get us going for the first couple of years and sort of follow along. And they weren't really a volunteer board. They were just fiduciary in the very beginning. We only had 1 meeting a year for probably the first 2 or 3 years. And then we started to get a more professional board. And my friends that I grew up with quickly got off the board as soon as we got new people on who were in our local region. In fact, just about everybody on our first board was out of state from Maryland because I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. But then we shifted over to more of a volunteer board. So you have your founding board, and then ours was a volunteer board. They never really came and like kept the lights on in terms of like they didn't keep QuickBooks for us, or I mean, we had a CPA who helped us with our 990 early on, but the main thing was that CPA found us when we were ready, someone to be an auditor. So really finding the resources through their contacts. And that was a hired thing. You know, we hire our auditor. That was a big piece of the Treasury job at the time. The president was very strategic, but by and large left the staff sort of run the show. Then over time, since at Red Wiggler, we've always run a community supported agriculture or CSA program. That was our first sort of connection to community members who really had a stake in what Red Wiggler was up to. In addition to that, parents of people who worked at Red Wiggler, and I mean worked at Red Wiggler as growers, adults with developmental disabilities. Of course, they have a stake in how Red Wiggler does because their son or sibling might be served by the organization. I want to say that those folks, that cuts both ways. Parents, I often now I've learned the hard way. I always, if it's a parent or sibling or someone very connected to someone who we serve, during the vetting process, I say, look, you know, I know you might think that being on the board means that you can really advocate for your son, daughter, sister, brother. However, we're very clear that we do not have favorites. And if anything, we're oversensitive to that. And so I just kind of overdo it in the very beginning. Now, of course, you know, they do have better access, it's true, but we don't want anybody getting special treatment that creates all sorts of morale problems. Over time, now we're getting closer to maybe 5, 6 years in. I had joined an organization, not joined. I paid to join. I paid to be a part of Leadership Montgomery and go through their year-long process. There I met Leadership Montgomery. Montgomery County, Maryland has 1 million people in it. And so it's a pretty robust leadership program. We had county council members on Leadership Montgomery that came through the program. We also had lots of small business people, bankers, attorneys, people from the school system. So I got to meet in my class, I think there were 40 of these leaders. And within 2 years of graduating or 3 years of graduating from Leadership Montgomery, I think half our board was made up of Leadership Montgomery alumni. And most of that was me talking up Red Wiggler, listening to what people, how they responded. When people will say to me, like, you know, or even if it's a CSA customer, if they start asking questions like, what's your budget size? How big is your board? Tell me more about Red Wiggler. And it's more about the organization and less about what they get out of being involved with Red Wiggler. That then is an indicator that this might be a good board person. I'll then say that that original board that was developed utilizing the Leadership Montgomery program, what we probably should have done in hindsight is develop term limits, which we did not do. And what happened there was wonderful, very capable board members just honestly stayed too long. And what happens, what does that mean they stayed too long? And again, in hindsight, I should have seen this writing on the wall, but we had one, I can think of 2 board members who actually told me that they were leaving because our board already had it solved, that there was no room for their input because the board members who had been there 7 or 8 years pretty much said they would often say, we've tried that, or, you know, whatever reason, they sucked the air out of the room. And so had we had term limits, we probably would have had more churn within the board. We would have had more churn, which means more connections to the community. And today I can say that our term limits are 2 3-year terms. And then you have to take everybody, no matter whether you're an officer or just a normal board member without being an officer. At the end of those 2 3-year terms, they must step off for at least a year. That creates a lot of work for the executive director and the board leadership. However, I have found, now remember, we got more, we're closer to 10 years in. And we're now at 28 years. What would have happened was we just would have had more connections to the community, probably would have brought some people back on after they cycled off. They would have had some perspective. So that sort of is some advice on something I would do differently. On the makeup of boards, I think Kate's slides were awesome. I will say that I wouldn't recommend couples, like a team, whether however they're related, couples wise. It's just not a good idea. We did it once, and in the end, it didn't really work that well. But we've worked through it, and we're all still friends. But there was a little bit of a drama, let's say. And I wouldn't do that again. And I remember when they pitched me, they said, you get 2 for the price of 1. Well, yeah, well, when they go on vacation and they can't be there, that means there are 2 people missing.
Yeah.
When they write checks at the end of the year, it's 1 family writing a check, not 2 board members. And on that note, we do have a give or get policy. As long as you give something, It can be $10, and we've had people do that. In fact, the people that give $10, what they would do is sign up to give $10 every month. So they ended up giving, $120. So I really believe that you want 100% board participation. Now, I will say that I'm on a board that does not do that right now, but that organization is very large, and that little bit of money is not worth it to them in the context of the expertise that my fellow board members and I bring to the table. So all of these rules are just guidelines. They are not rules. You get to design your board, but remember, don't be stuck on your current design, and let it evolve with the growth of the organization. One thing I do like that might have been missing a little bit on the skill slide of board members is I like, especially if you're a small nonprofit, I like small business owners. Very often you'll get people that work at large companies. Their budgets are tremendous, multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar companies. I've had people from IBM and other companies like that. And even in county government, our county government, I think our budget in county government is something like $6.5 billion. And I had one board member once say to me, your budget is a rounding error in my program budget at the National Institute for Standards and Technology. And he was right. It's true. So when you have, like, presently we have an architect on our board. He runs a small firm, sort of a boutique architecture firm. Their budget is very similar to ours. Their human resources issues are very similar. Their staff are wearing multiple hats. That board member can speak for the staff in a board meeting in a way that the staff really can't, and can sort of help some of the folks who are involved with larger projects understand what it's like to run a small nonprofit. I will sort of close with, well, I've got two more points. Often you might find that it would be advantageous to have an advisory board. So let's say you have, and we don't have an advisory board. Quite frankly, I've not had the time to organize it. I think it's a great idea. And if I did have the time right now to organize it, what I would do is, I know a lot of people are interested in the success of Red Wiggler, but do not have the time to meet every other month for 2 hours on Zoom and stay abreast of our financial position, participate in a board evaluation, do all the things that Kate talked about as best practices. They just know they can't have so they don't want to join the board. But if they're on the advisory board, they're more likely to take my phone call when I have an issue that they can help with. And that's whether I can say, hey, we need someone with civil engineering experience to give me some advice about some construction that we're planning to do, or site planning or anything like that. And that architect, although they're on our board, they might say, well, I'll get you in touch with someone. An advisory board can really be helpful just by agreeing to answer my phone calls when I call, or answer my emails. So an advisory board is something to consider. The last thing I'll talk about is training. Over the years, we really had our own version of training that kind of came and went with our capacity to provide that training. Today, again, Montgomery County is fairly large. We not only have Leadership Montgomery, but we have an organization called Nonprofit Montgomery. And they've partnered with Leadership Montgomery to run a program called Board Match. And they run the whole thing. And it is 2 parts. Actually, it's 3 parts. The first part is they train executive directors on how to work with a board. How do you onboard somebody? how do you develop a position description for board officers as well as members? And then the second leg of that three-part stool is they train prospective board members, because remember, they're in partnership with the leadership program that encourages people to get involved in their community. So if you go in cold as a board member and you don't know what's expected of you, and if it's a up and coming board nonprofit, you might not have all your ducks in a row. So they train everyone and that wants to become a board member. Then and that's all done now on Zoom. It used to be in person. Then the third leg of the stool is a matching program. And we've participated in this, and it's been very successful in that there would be a team of volunteers who I've been on the recipient of this, and I've also been one of the volunteers to do the matching. And you go through and you look at the resumes or the questionnaire that a prospective board member would have, and then you would look at what nonprofits' missions are and what they're looking for in board members. And then our job was to do the matching. And we've had 3 members join our board who went through that system. And it's just been tremendous because they've all had the same training. And I've done the training twice, and it's very helpful. So also a plug for Maryland Association for Nonprofits. Like Kate said, they have one in Minnesota. There's some sort of an association in every state across the country, I'm pretty sure, or close to it. And that's a great resource if you don't have these other sort of leadership and nonprofit associations. The state leadership or nonprofit associations are wonderful. And with that, I hope I didn't go too long.
Thanks, Woody. I'm going to echo what you said about couples on a board. I learned that lesson, and we changed bylaws so that couples, if they're on a board, it's 2 people that are on a board and they don't serve as kind of what I've experienced as a 2-headed monster. So, but maybe others have had different experiences with couples on a board, but yeah.
In our case, it worked until it didn't.
Yeah, there you go. Well, it's helpful to hear about having been in care farming for 28 years and like hearing some of the changes that happened and successes for recruitment and lessons learned with your board through the years. I did throw in the chat just kind of some prompts here for discussion. And was reading through the chat. It looks like some folks are here just to kind of learn a little bit more, might be in the beginning stages or thinking about starting a farm. But for anybody who is currently on a board or thinking of joining a board or supervised by a board, what brings you here today? What questions might you have? Also looks like we have some really good links being shared here. Thank you, Andrea. The National Council of Nonprofits that will lead you to your state's directory for your own state's Council of Nonprofits. So I think here in Minnesota, we might have more nonprofits than any other state in the United States. So we have very, very robust systems, but definitely lean on your state Council of Nonprofits for a whole host of really helpful information. So.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I don't have my camera, but my name's Hannah and I'm calling from Desert Survivors in Tucson, Arizona. We've been here 40 years. And I'm the new ED. So I think my struggle is mostly about how to encourage the board to consider that maybe some changes could be made. And that's tricky, you know. They've all been on the board for many, many years.
Hmm.
The bylaws are very bare bones, and because of that, they've just been re-electing each other for more than a decade.
Hannah, when
So-
you ask about changes, and first of all, it's really great to hear your voice, and I loved meeting you in Tucson in February.
Yay.
For anyone look up Desert Survivors, real cool place there in Tucson. And congrats too on moving into a position, and you moved into a position where you're essentially replacing the founder. Too.
Practically. Yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like when I talk to people about our board, it's most useful to consider them a founders board,
Yeah,
because that's what they're, you know, that's what they're most like.
right.
Even though those board members came on probably, I don't know, 10 or 20 years in. Probably 20 years in, but still they act like a founders board for sure.
Hannah, can I ask if you have, has your board ever done any kind of self, kind of audit?
No. The last board, well, not the last board meeting, but the one before that, we had a woman who is a professional fundraiser. She works with tons of nonprofits. She loves us, is totally into the mission. She wanted us to hire her, but we couldn't afford her. But she said, anything I can do, I want to help. I'd love to be on the board, because we don't have a strong history of fundraising in general, and our board does not do it. They barely donate. They don't have any financial connections, nothing. And they don't really recognize that that's something that I would expect. And when we brought her resume to that board meeting and suggested that this would be very helpful for me to have a professional developer, they said, no, thanks, we're fine how we are. So that's where
Yeah,
I'm at.
it's frustrating.
I see is that Annie has her hand up. I just, in response to that, what I would add to something that we've done at Red Wiggler is we have, it's not really a contract, but it's kind of like a MOU, a memorandum of understanding. It's a one pager. It lays out what the staff will do. Like, we will set the meeting, we'll set up the Zoom, we'll work with the board president to develop an agenda, and we will get it to you in a timely manner prior to the meeting. Things like that. And it can be, you tailor it. And then you have what the board is expected to do, and you lay it all out. And Hannah, you're in a unique situation. You're a change agent in many ways. And you might, it might not be as easy, but for everyone in the room here, just having that MOU up front as you're onboarding has been very helpful.
Yeah,
And I think we can get you a copy of that MOU. Catherine is asking. Andrea can hold my feet to that.
I think I appreciate everything that was presented earlier, because that's I've been on plenty of boards. And so I kind of knew what I was looking for and what I thought was reasonable to expect when I got here. And I think, yeah, it was kind of a rude awakening.
Wow. Well, Hannah, I'm going to offer too. I've been in your situation on a board. I've been in your situation as director too. So if you ever want to just talk offline about maybe some other things, or other suggestions or ways of approaching this, I would be more than happy to do so.
That'd be great, Kate. I will say, as far as advice goes, connecting with whatever local organization that supports nonprofits, grant makers, what have you. I've been able to get some free consultant hours that way, and it's really helped. It's helped just, you know, to have somebody to bounce ideas off of who
Yeah.
have more experience than me. So that might be useful.
Thank you. Annie, you've had your hand up there.
Hi, I'm Annie Spindler. I'm the founder, executive director of Elderflower Community. We're a farm-based, holistic, multi-generational care for elders. So people living with dementia and elders that need additional support. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for all this great information, Kate and Woody. It's nice to see you again. Thanks for all your tips. We're brand new. I just got my 501c3 status at the end of April. And so trying to build our board. I have so many questions, but I guess mainly my board consists of a lot of, experts in the field, not necessarily friends of mine. And I'm curious to, which is beneficial, I think it will be in the future. But I'm curious to, I wanted to ask Woody's opinion about being the founder and executive director, and then moving through time. And like, did you ever find that you kind of lost your dream? Like, it feels like my baby, right? Like, this is my dream, my vision. I want it to be a part of the community. That's why it's a nonprofit. I want everyone to have a voice, but also it's like, it really means so much to me. And I feel like sometimes the board, I really would love for them to be more fundraising specifically, I like going out and making connections in the community and fundraising, but I feel like they are not passionate about that piece of it. So my other question with that is like, how can I find someone who loves fundraising and wants to join the board, maybe as president, that can really kind of lead our efforts in that piece of it too? So sorry, so many questions. But thank you.
I guess that was to me. Let's see. On the subject of experts in the field, I've been very careful not to have farmers on our board. Now, this is my take. There are others who actually will say they want, like, we're running a care farm, and you might have somebody who's got farming experience. That doesn't necessarily mean they have care farming experience, and it can mean that their expertise is getting in the way of our mission because they're trying to get us to be super efficient or whatever version of permaculture or just whatever the flavor of the year is. We have maintained our mission as the critical path to the future, not necessarily our staff learning. Don't take this wrong. We want to be better farmers because we want to be able to instruct the people involved in our care farm in best practices. And we certainly want to do right by the land and all of that. But in a sense, the staff are the experts. It's our job to go out and get trained on best practices. And we do that in a number of ways, usually in the winter by going to conferences that are farming conferences, or going to the Care Farm Network conference that's coming up in January. So I've steered clear of experts that are in the field that we're in, and stuck closer to experts who are experts in finance, experts in legal issues, experts in connecting people. That's what a fundraiser is. They're friend raisers first from a board perspective. I've always written our grants. We've never had board members write grants, but we've had board members suggest where we might write a grant to. Now, on that front, there's also a frequently asked questions page that we have. It probably needs to be updated. That thing does now, but we could share that with you. A lot of times board members they'll like, for us, they'll say, well, what, we should be going to farmers markets. Well, our model is really about community supported agriculture. And so that's a frequently asked question. And or here's my favorite is, why aren't we selling to more restaurants? That would give us some, and in our case, now, not, you know, one care farm, you know, one care farm. So, you know, this is my experience is that that we have a reason that we don't do wholesale pricing, because we can get full retail. And so there's a frequently asked questions thing that can head off some of those dead end conversations that are really kind of a bummer to have all the time. Regarding being a founder and relinquishing control, Andrea has been along for the ride for almost 15 years or maybe longer at this point. I can't remember exactly. She was our farm manager for 9 years and has been with the Care Farming Network in some capacity as we were getting going since 2018. Is that right? 18. She's witnessed my clinging to old patterns and slowly being able to let go of my grip on some things. It's a challenge, and I recommend having a therapist. I really do. And I recommend being very self-aware of that desire to control. It's not easy, and I have had to apologize on many occasions to our staff and our board for that behavior. And that's what I call it. We're people too, you know? And yes, we have all our stories about how we got going, and it's never pretty, you know? It's never, the first years are not easy. But at some point you got to let go of that. You just can't go back there. Now, I've gone back there as recently as a few months ago, you know, so 28 years later, I'm still doing this. I'm still holding on to stuff, but I can also say that I've let go of a lot of things. So I believe in having a therapist, someone you can talk to that's not your colleague. Sometimes it can be a board member, but the nice thing about a therapist is you can tell them everything, and you can make mistakes when you're talking, and it's not going to be punitive or somehow leave a bad taste in somebody's mouth. So I honestly recommend, if you can, have someone that you can talk to that's trained in helping you deal with these sort of issues. Did I cover your questions there? There were sort of 3.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. Thank you. Another one too is just how to attract, you know, board presidents or people that are passionate about fundraising. I feel like so many people in Asheville specifically that are passionate about fundraising are overworked, I guess, to say the least. I don't know. Everyone seems so super busy, so I'm not sure.
It's everyone wants the fundraiser. I'm on their board. It's hard to come by. That's not to say you shouldn't strive for that. Again, we're a little bit more established, so you know what we try to do is say, hey, the staff run the details. You know, we keep an eye on the deadlines, but if you can bring us sources to look at, if you can learn how to use GuideStar, or what's it called now? Something else. If you can do your own research and look at people's 990s, you know, foundations wise, you can go do some research. That's helpful and give us some context. We try to have events, and we encourage our board members to bring people to events that they think might be interested. That's a version of development. And always, as an executive director, I think you have to keep your ear to the ground, always listening and watching for people who are essentially saying, I think I can help you. They might not say it in as many words, but you start to recognize the clues that people drop, and you go, oh, that person has a lot of connections in a certain area, and they'd be really helpful. And then you nurse them along. It takes time. It's rare to bring in somebody who can really do it right off the bat, like hit the ground running. It just takes time. But again, I believe in term limits, so don't waste time. overly training people up and overly getting people, you need to go through 3 years before you know how it all works. No, one cycle, maybe two. And they can start to be super helpful, but be patient.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Again, this is all my personal perspective. Take it or leave it.
Annie, I'm gonna just chime in on the fundraising part of it with board members, because I think having served, again, on both sides of being a board member and at a smaller organization where fundraising, it felt like just fell in the lap of, and the purview of executive director. I was constantly trying to encourage board members to be fundraisers, and that's not always why they joined the board. And I will just say, for board recruitment, we ended up not saying we needed one person to do fundraising, but the entire board to serve as fundraisers. And then we broke that up into like, what did we mean by fundraising? In our event, or in our case, we needed someone who was a really good writer. So there were some grant procurement. We also needed somebody who could do events really well. And was kind of detail oriented with that. So then it was that person kind of working that angle. We needed somebody who could do social really well, so we could kind of hit the online fundraising. And so by maybe going forward, really being clear with new board members that the expectation is that every single board member is a fundraiser in some aspect, and then giving different routes for folks to kind of plug in instead of just having this overly broad term of sort of fundraising. That seems to resonate more with some of the board members, just that clear expectation and like, all right, here's what you will be doing. If that's helpful at all.
Yeah, that is, thank you. We had a board retreat and we talked for 4 hours about how we're going to fundraise and who's going to do what. We're going to do this, and we all committed to raising a certain amount of funds, and everyone was so excited. And then 2 board members quit, and then no one else raised any funds.
Oh,
That's how it's going so far.
that's
but
disheartening. I'm sorry.
It happens. I'm learning so much. I'm grateful for everything that I'm learning as I'm going. So it's been a lot.
I'd piggyback on that and say, if you can, if the relationship is good enough, when someone quits, listen to they've already thought about it. I don't play games with people anymore. I used to. I used to say, is there any way you could stay on for another year or something like that? I think when someone's ready to go, they know it, they've thought about it, and I let them go. But what I do want to do is spend time with them one-on-one and ask them about their experience. It's an exit interview. It does not have to feel like an exit interview. It can be going to lunch. It can be a phone call. But I try to find out. That's how I learned that this one really wonderful board member, she told everyone the reason, she had family reasons for getting off the board. In reality, it was the board members that had been there for so long had all the answers, and they didn't need to hear from this really wonderful person. And she's like, I don't have time to just be a bump on a log. And so we lost a good board member. But then that's really helpful. That's what also then precipitated developing term limits. And term limits are hard to come by sometimes, and people do them differently. But doing an exit interview is always a good thing, I think.
We have about 5 more minutes. Anyone else? Let's see, do I see somebody with a raised hand here?
I was just wondering, something you've given some great tips here. Think about a small business person or this or that, but you have the memo you're going to send us, which would be great. Anything else? Because I don't have the support of a university yet.
Well, just to be clear, it's not the university. Was Leadership Montgomery. It's a nonprofit in its own right, and then there's another association. But they're associations. We have not done a lot with University of Maryland or universities.
Sorry, I meant
but
those,
you could. I could see that. It just depends on where you are. I,
There's plenty,
of
so.
course, in the very beginning, look, we all, these are not mistakes in the beginning. You're doing everything you can to keep it going.
Yeah,
And you're going to learn that you made mistakes, but you have to make the mistakes in order to get to the next, level sometimes. It's
Yeah.
just the way it is. So have some mercy for yourself,
thank you.
learn from it. And then also when I used to, I don't know how I got into this role as a farmer part-time and as a social worker part-time to be a care farmer. But, I remember driving the truck the second year in and it started smoking, at the hood, and I kept driving it. And then I was broken down on the side of the road. In other words, look for the signals
Yeah,
that someone is going to be controlling or is not going to be a team player. And then the other thing is, I am very blunt. I have a sit down with people and I say, look, I know you're very interested in the success of Red Wiggler because your daughter works here, your son, whatever, sibling. But as a board member, your role is about fiduciary. It's about managing me. It's not about managing the program.
Yeah.
We set the mission, and I'm just very sort of hard about it.
yeah,
And I'm normally fairly congenial, I think is maybe a good word, friendly, sort of like joking around. But I have a very, like sit down, and I do it in the office. I try to. And I just up front, those are awareness statements. Look, this is what we need. Recognize that you're not going to get special treatment.
yeah.
So I just, look for the signals. And if you're in a place where you can say no to somebody because it's not a good fit right now, you're going to save yourself a lot of heartache. And I have sort of backed off of, just because you're talking about it doesn't mean they have to join.
Right.
And it's really tough to get there, especially in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's
this gentleman who I can't quite, my glasses can't read that name, but Berlin Wilford has his hand up patiently.
Yes, that would be me. Thank you.
Yeah.
If it's the right place, I take the opportunity. I missed it at the beginning. I'm here from Germany, Berlin, and I had occasion to visit some community gardens in Chicago 2 weeks ago on invitation of the German American Chamber of Commerce. And I'm sorry that my colleague Thomas van Elsen can't be here today. He's registered for your for your newsletter, and we are from the board of the German working group for social agriculture, and me in person. I'm at the board of a community garden, and we are starting at the very moment to build up a project for people that focuses on people with disablement, but has to be a community garden for the neighborhood. So I'm very excited to have that I had the opportunity to be with you, and hopefully I will see you within the next meetings too, so we can deepen this a little bit. But for today,
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining today.
very much.
I know we have a lot of comments in the chat. I feel like this conversation could, maybe we need a part 2 at some time in the future, because it seems like there's a lot to process. In our just last minutes, I want to do a couple announcements. Andrea just threw that in the chat. But on our website, you're going to see that we have a conference, national conference coming up in January of 2025. There's a link to it. It's January 13th through the 15th. It's going to be taking place in Western Massachusetts. We are pretty jazzed about that. We'd love to see y'all there. We also have in September coming up, we're going to do our second iteration of the beginning Care Farming Virtual Series. So there's going to be 3 Wednesdays in September where we will meet just like this to talk about some topics that are most pertinent, we feel, to aspiring care farmers. So there's registration online for that, Wednesdays in September. And we're going to be also posting a lot more about some of the care farm meetups and tours that we're going to be having throughout Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and actually a meetup in Minnesota in October. So lots of stuff going on in the following months. For anybody else, please, we'll have some resources coming your way. There's plenty of connections to be made here. We have a Facebook discussion group, which is a private group that I encourage anybody to join. And maybe that's another way of connecting or asking questions around board governance or whatever's on your mind. Otherwise, thank you, Woody, for sharing your knowledge, wisdom, history, and lessons learned with this whole group. And yeah, thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us on our monthly member gathering, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.